Hello and welcome back to the Food Fight Show. My name is Nathan Harvey. I'll be your host today. We've got a really exciting episode coming up here. We'll get to all of those details in a minute. First, I just want to make some, typical announcements that we have. As you all probably know, Chef Conf is coming up. Chef Conf is coming very, very soon. It's happening May 22nd through the 25th in Chicago, Illinois. This is a great opportunity to get together with a lot of people within the chef community. Even if you're not using Chef, you should come to Chef Conf. Why? Well, you could learn a little bit about Chef, but also there's folks there that are really concerned with DevOps and site reliability engineering, or SRE. Come and learn from those folks about how they're automating their enterprise, how they're building automation into everything that they do. And in addition to that, how are they learning from the failures that are coming along during building out that automation and as they're running and operating systems. You've only got about 2 weeks left before the early bird ticket prices are over. So get your ticket now. Again, there's training, there's keynotes, there's a great community, and you can actually take the chef certification exams for free if you show up there. So check that out at chefconf.com. And then you can find out about all of the other upcoming chef events at events.chef.io. Now, on to today's topic. We actually, maybe you've noticed a little trend here. We've had some really fun episodes lately. We had one recently about incident management and incident response. We talked with Charity Majors about observability. And our most recent episode was actually sort of a learning review, if you will, or a post-mortem of what happened when we had to move the DevOps Days Baltimore conference back a day. Like the week of the conference, we had to pick up the conference and move it, which was pretty crazy. So we digested and learned and retrospected on that event in our last episode. So today, this episode that we have today is all about a project, a recent report that came out called the STELLA report. Now, we'll get to exactly what the STELLA report is and why it was named the STELLA report in just a moment. But first, let me introduce our panelists for today. And I'm going to start off with my good friend, Alan. So Alan, if you could say hello to everyone, let folks know who you are, where you are, and yeah, that'd be great.
Hi, folks. I'm Alan Kraft. I work at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office in our IT organization's Office of Infrastructure and Engineering Operations. I am currently at home today on a day off, enjoying a nice spring on the East Coast. I should, in fact, I must say that I am speaking for myself and not for my employer. And I've been enjoying following this topic for some time, and particularly the STELLA report since its release. So I'm excited to have the conversation today.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on. And next up, we have John Alspaugh. John, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing great. I'm coming at you from the Catskills in upstate New York. I'm normally in Brooklyn, but I'm up here on holiday with my kids' spring break. I'm pretty excited to talk about this.
That's awesome. So John, I know a lot of people, myself included, have followed a bunch of your work over the years. And in the DevOps movement, in the SRE space, there's been a lot of talk around the idea of blameless postmortems. And I'd like to thank you for bringing a lot of that to the fore and like really driving us as an industry to embrace that idea. But I know that you've done, continuing to do work and research into that, and maybe that's part of where the STELLA report came from. So maybe as our first question here, what is the STELLA report?
Yeah, so let's see if I can keep this concise. So about 3 years ago, in following a trend that I had been trying to bring people from other, I'll say other fields of research around how people make decisions and how people how people come up with designs based on all kinds of uncertain situations and ambiguous scenarios. And so by that, I mean human factors, cognitive systems engineering, resilience engineering. I brought David Woods, who is what you would just call a heavy Woods is a heavy in this in these fields. So I brought him to the Velocity conference in New York, and he gave a keynote talk, and we had some time to talk after. There was a small group along with Dave about, hey, you know, the thing that struck Dave, he said, well, this isn't a community I was even aware of. You know, Dave started out his career in nuclear, and has been doing research in this way for aviation and medicine, all that sort of thing. And I said, Dave, look, you know, I can keep, and I will continue to keep inviting people to come speak at conferences. But I'm just, so there's really no stopping me from bridging these domains, but what else can we do? He said, well, what we've done in the past is a consortium. And what that means is basically you set up a small, meaning like a 2 to 3 year project or 2 to 3 year organization where industry partners provide some funding for the research, and on the university side and the academic side, the research is done. And so you set it up so it's as win-win for all sides. And so from that conversation came this idea of the snafu catchers. I think the technical term, I think if you were to look at the funding documents at Ohio State University, I think it's resilient, resilience engineering in business critical software services or something along those lines, right? But quickly, Richard Cook, who's also part of Dave's lab, and Dave came up with this idea of calling it snafu catchers. We could talk about that if you want, but effectively it meant that Dave's lab, the Cognitive Systems Engineering Lab, and 3 partners that we managed to get together, a financial trading firm called IEX in Manhattan, IBM, which you've heard of, and Etsy, which is a handmade marketplace in Brooklyn. And so that was the sort of year 0, and the project was called Coping with Complexity. And so in a nutshell, the STELLA report is effectively the public facing sort of written report of the entire project.
Right. And so if I understand it correctly, you brought folks from IEX, from IBM, from Etsy all together, I presume, with David and Richard in the room and yourself, and spent a day or two talking about stuff. Can you describe sort of the process of what happened in that room?
Yeah. Well, actually, I have to say, to back up, that workshop was the end of the project. To be clear, Dave, Richard, a man named Asher Balkin, a woman named Laura McGuire from Dave's lab had visited all 3 of these organizations, and effectively, well, you want to say embedded. In some cases, they were on site with IBM's Whitewater team in Raleigh, North Carolina, or in Manhattan at IEX, or at Etsy. And they there's probably 5 or 6 different visits at each of the groups. And sometimes they were able to observe outages, but a lot of qualitative data collection, wikis and code reviews, and post-mortem documents and all that sort of thing. The meeting you're referring to was actually, it was around this time. Actually, it was probably, I guess it was March. I think, yeah, March 22nd of 2017, and it was 2017, and it was really the bookend right? So it was effectively where the research group said to said to each of the industry partners, like, so look, this is what we found. Let's walk through and make sure we got this right. And I want to hear, let's hear all of your, reflections of it. And so the original plan was they'd come out for about a day. If we had a day and a half, that'd be great. To be fair, I was only present for maybe about half of it. I was CTOing at the time, and it turns out I had some other things to do. But they walked through each of the cases. Now the project was really taking an outage, an incident from each of the organizations, and choosing a particular incident from each of the organizations. And that's really what the workshop was, to sort of walk through. And as it turned out, this snowstorm hit the Northeast, and the snowstorm was called the STELLA storm. STELLA, snowstorm Stella, I guess, which is what the report's named after. So what ended up happening, instead of being like a day or a day and a morning, ended up being at least two days plus then some, because a bunch of people got snowed in.
So I wonder a couple of things just to follow up on that. First, it sounds like, and I know from the report, that you didn't talk in generalizations around how do you respond to incidents and how do you learn from incidents. You picked 3 very specific incidents, and I believe it was one from each of the industry partners to really dig through. So I'd like to just get an understanding of maybe sort of what drove that, and to what extent did that impact the report and the findings. But then the second thing, like, that is clearly something that you did intentionally. The second thing happened very unintentionally, right? This snowstorm struck, and the people were stuck, for lack of a better word, in a room together. And so I wonder, what impact did that have on the research and the outcomes as well?
Right. The first part of your question is really the thing that continues to really just sort of blow my mind, and I'm continually wrapping my head around it. So, doing this work, and now let's be fair. I mean, I have even though my background is in software, I have a foot in both camps. I have my master's. The fact that I don't have a PhD is still shocking to both myself, Dave, Richard, and my wife. At this point, it's a foregone conclusion. But what is fascinating about this work, and all these fields that I mentioned before, what's fascinating about it, there's no such thing as a purely academic. There's really no such. It's all field work. This is all work, and what's really specific about doing this work is all of the messy details. So unlike, say, sort of your traditional psychology or traditional, business or management or leadership or whatever, we don't start from high level concepts and then spend time operationalizing them down within a particular organization. What we do is we find the boots on the ground, right? We need to as quickly as we can get to talk with people who are in the muck, in the day-to-day. Their hands are in the patient, on the table. By the way, this isn't necessarily a metaphor. This is also a thing that happens. And so instead, we look at these and elaborate as much as we can that analysis of specific, concrete, grounded events, and then we move up. And so that way, it's always grounded. It's always concrete. And so that's the super exciting part about that. And so that unfolded over, some period of time. And the part of sort of moving upwards, or part of the the theme was coping with complexity, and it really comes down to two questions, and this is quite typical of most cognitive systems engineering projects, to ask really two questions around these grounded events. What makes this work hard? What makes people good at it? Those are the two questions. And everything can be really led from there. Of course, they're all very specific techniques and approaches and all of that about what we know from cognition in pressurized scenarios. But it really all comes down to that. Now, if we could find, didn't know what we were going to find, right? We didn't know what we were looking for, and we didn't know what we were going to find. This is quite typical of qualitative research. And so there were a number of themes, and I wouldn't say patterns, I would say themes, in some cases patterns, that ended up being the 6 or so that are in the STELLA report across all. And that what's significant about this is these organizations are so very different, right? And so so they went into that STELLA workshop with some strong, I wouldn't say hypotheses, because a lot of the research had been done, a lot of the evidence gathering and all that sort of stuff had been done. But what having those groups in the room together did was a couple things. One, it shed some light on some facets of the themes that hadn't been explored, and I could sort of tell you part of that. But the other part is that the groups themselves were able to see these patterns unfold as they were presenting each other's cases to each other. And that was the crazy significant part was, the idea that IEX, an engineering group of, I can't imagine, it's probably, I don't think it's more than about 12 people, right? That has effectively, what you could probably say is the GDP of small countries passing through its wires on a daily basis, compared to or contrasted with the Whitewater group at IBM, who's tasked with building, internal development tools and platforms for use inside of IBM by software engineers, and then Etsy, engineering group of about 330 people, and that was in retail. I mean, the fact that there were such strong common themes was pretty wild. So yeah, I mean, it was more than icing on the cake, the snowstorm. It was it was additive, certainly.
Yeah. Do you think, the 3 organizations that you described, it's pretty clear they aren't competitors with one another, right? Etsy is not competing with IEX at all, right? No. Do you think this would have been possible if you had, say, 3 folks that were in the retail space, or 3 different organizations in the online retail space? Do you think you would have had the same level of insight and the same sort of themes being uncovered?
Possibly. One of the things, however, I will say is that, part of and when we're looking, and by the way, we're now officially in the second cycle. All of the members aren't, the names of the member companies aren't public just yet, although I can say that IBM is continuing on, the Whitewater group. When we talk with members, a big part is, well, obviously confidentiality is paramount. But another concern that does come up from time to time that we'll, happy to work on solving is, some people say, yeah, I'll be part of the consortium. I don't want any competitors to be part of the consortium. So that's really up to the member companies, and that's a constraint that we're certainly happy to abide by. So the answer is possibly. I don't know if we'll ever know, but possibly, yeah. I mean, given what we saw, again, I think given what we saw, I cannot. It's very difficult, and what we've seen even thus far in the second cycle, I think that there is, you know, in the end, the tech might be different, the goals might be different, the dynamics of the organization might be different. How people understand, tease apart, work together, coordinate, all of this, the tech, you know, to some extent really doesn't matter. They're all looking at screens, and they all get just tiny little snapshots, tiny little keyholes into what is otherwise a, you know, an astronomically large universe of possibilities, especially when we're talking about incidents.
You know, John, one of the things I was wondering, and I don't know if you're at liberty to, you know, announce this at this point or not, but the second round that you just alluded to of the consortium, are they kind of continuing on the same coping with complexity track, dark debt, right, and the whole post-mortem aspects?
It's good. That is actually, no, that's, I am at liberty to say, because the answer is I don't know yet. But I think what might be helpful is, I mean, the ideal, and so we've spoken with all of the four, you know, the four members, and part of the process, I guess, remember, you know, since they're funding the work, they also should collectively have the ability. That's part of the deal. They have the ability to help direct and or guide, you know, future directions of the research. I mean, the ideal, of course, is that we could build upon or perhaps go deeper in one of the topics, which is basically what, you know, similar to what you were saying. That was in the STELLA report. If we could build on the same, you know, in the same directions. My gut tells me somewhere around June, I think we're shooting for June, we'll have another meeting with all of the groups, another face-to-face. We're out and talking with, and we're attending stand-ups, and we're in Slack channels with folks. But after this sort of first getting the lay of the land, then we'll bring everybody, at least representatives from each of the members, out to Columbus at OSU for a sort of a day-long sort of discussion about what the lab thinks are fruitful directions, and what does that look like. So it's not likely to be, and it's likely to be a deeper dive into some of the themes, perhaps more than one of the themes that we saw in the STELLA report. The STELLA report, again, is, think of it more of really that there's really two purposes. One was to really just paint the landscape, like these are things. Does it mean that they're inclusive and, you know, it's exhaustive? No, but these are dynamics. These are phenomena that take place and can be identified. And and then, you know, dark debt, for example. What does, you know, the dark debt is, the section is only about, I don't even know if it is an entire page. But you could imagine, we could imagine a world like, okay, well, we've thrown something out there as a concept of dark debt. It does dark debt. What is dark debt? What does it mean? What does it mean? And what do we do with this existential situation where only incidents, a big part of the thing that's unsettling for people is incidents are what reveal dark debt, and they cannot be revealed any other way. What the hell are you going to do with that? That's very difficult. And how does that affect, you know, design and that sort of thing. I have a few. It's not dark debt. I have a few that I'm really super interested in, but again, this has to be sort of jointly sort of decided on. But I mean, I think your initial question is that, yeah, we'll likely go deeper on one of the themes that we have already surfaced.
Yeah, and one of those themes that we've said a bunch of times now is dark debt, but maybe there are folks that haven't yet had a chance to read the STELLA report. Certainly, I know what technical debt is. So, can you sort of describe what do you mean when you say dark debt? What is that?
Yeah. So the concept really is based on Hofstadter's idea of dark matter, which is that dark matter itself can't really be detected. It can't be measured. It can't be found. It can't be identified. But what you can find are really the footprints, right? You can find indications that it exists. And really that's what dark debt is, which is that incidents reveal that that an interaction or a dynamic exists that could not have been found prior to the incident, because if you had found it, then it wouldn't have been dark debt. And so the debt part is really the riff on Cunningham's technical debt, of course, and Richard went back and forth with Ward on technical debt, and perhaps unsurprisingly, I think Ward's original coinage of the term technical debt, I mean, I suspect is likely somewhat frustrating to him, because it gets used to mean so many things that he did not intend it to mean. But basically the idea is, let me see here, right? Well, Fowler went on to say the technical debt is really that which can be corrected by refactoring, right? And the key point was that Ward said was that technical debt is identified at the time it's created, not after. And so, I like to say this: you don't accidentally take out a loan, but all that's part of how, unfortunately, it gets used. And so, dark debt is really that. The idea is that an incident really is a signal that your system is sending to you to direct your attention, right? Hey, you might want to look over here, everybody, because this part right here, it doesn't work the way you thought it did, right? That sort of thing. So that's really the notion of dark debt. I'm not nearly as eloquent as the paper.
That's one of the things that I've been kind of fascinated with in the STELLA report, because technical debt has been a hot issue with my colleagues, and yet we were finding, like you described, that the original definition was getting morphed and stretched, almost to the breaking point. And to cover some important things, we actually had an event that Nathan joined us on our campus, an internal World Cafe formatted event where we talked about 4 different topics. And one of the ones I led, which was about the STELLA report. And that technical debt thing was one of the things that caught people's interest. And you'd mentioned that notion of refactoring. And as we went through several rounds of discussion about that, one of the things that came out and was kind of helpful for people to understand was it's not a trade-off like the original technical debt metaphor, where we decide, to get minimum viable product out now, we're going to do something that we know isn't the best technique, and we'll refactor it, in sprint whatever down the road. And so we had a really mixed audience of different specialties across our whole IT group, but that started to make the light bulb go off and talk about, well, you had some trade-offs in play when you incurred this kind of classic technical debt. Dark debt was a fundamental surprise, and we
Yes.
talked about the contrasts of those and how to deal with them, and more on that and how to deal with it would be great. You had mentioned, John, earlier that it's all field work, and one of the things I feel really kind of a need for is a field guide to do this work, because it's hard and it's against traditional culture. We're not, it doesn't play with kind of the Taylorism that is ingrained in everyone's culture. It doesn't play with a deterministic Cartesian worldview. It goes kind of against a lot of our gut feelings, and so a field guide would be great. And one of the things I was wondering if you could maybe share with us your thoughts on just some of the techniques that were useful for the folks, because it's hard to do well. Some of the techniques that were useful, and there's been some things that I've been wondering about. I wound up getting really interested in what was coming out of Lund University after hearing some of your velocity talks. And so in addition to your thesis there, I stumbled upon the ones from the Forest Service, including Joe Harris, who wrote one about staff rides.
Yes.
And I've been thinking ever since I read that, I thought, what if we, for these events in the STELLA report, you list a bunch of events that have the dark debt signature, Knight Capital, several airlines, Amazon, etc. There is kind of a body of events that have this dark debt signature. And, is there a way to, it's maybe a stretch from the world where this started, which was the military, but is there a way to do something like a staff ride? When I got into looking at what the Forest Service's learning center in their wildland firefighters, they took that to heart, and it was a stretch of the technique from them, from its military origin, into using it to deal with fatal incidents in wildland firefighting. But some of those, I don't know if you've ever seen it. There's one on the Alaba fire. That's a video that they put out on TED Ed.
Yep.
And over the course of my career, I've had lots of great IT training, and honestly, I forgot lots of it. that video of that staff ride, it's seared into my memory. I can't forget that.
Yeah.
And if you could do something that was that compelling for these dark debt signatures, then people are like, oh, people would feel what it was like for all the different players and the goal conflicts they had and the trade-offs they had to make, the constraints they were under. And, you might hopefully walk away with something that's unforgettable.
Alan, I think that could be easily one of the best questions. That's an incredible question. And I think that is, it seems to me that it would be a missed opportunity if the royal we, didn't take that question seriously. That's and I hadn't really considered that. I think you're absolutely correct. First of all, I think you're absolutely correct. There is no substitute than walking in boots, so to speak, right? There is no substitute that to understand an event without hearing or experiencing it, or at the very least firsthand. And Joe's thesis was really an excellent question. By the way, just because Nathan, because you started off that way, most of what I've ever written about, no, all of what I've ever written about, as far as taking a systems view to accident investigation, software has nothing on the U.S. forestry. If you want to find a situation where there is objective and universally accepted paradigm shifts over the past 10 years, it's in fire, and it's in Joe's office, and the Office of Learning. So I need to just throw that out there. You know, Alan, I think that's a great question. That's a great, I think there could be something there. I mean, it seems like we should just call Joe and see what he thinks. I think because the reason why that is exciting, and I'll tell you this, one of the things that came out of this, also in the STELLA report, was the idea that postmortems provide opportunities for model update or model recalibration, mental model recalibration. And that is to say that you have, especially when you have multiple diverse perspectives come into a room, these are all people that that had a different perspective on the event. They had for the most part, typically they have their attention is in related but not the exact same places. They're worried about related but different things. They're completely in the dark or totally, you know, flummoxed about related but different things than everybody else. And so by doing that, what you do, Gary Klein and Robert Hoffman wrote a great paper called "Seeing the Invisible," and what this does is set up the conditions for what they called vicarious learning. Well, that is to say, you have novices and experts in the room. People, and when I say expert, let's say people who have been around the systems. They know how it behaves. They know it can do this thing once in a while when it does this. And when you see this log line, you know, you got to kick it in this particular way, but don't kick it too hard, or, you know, and around the holidays, it can do this. So you get to watch, you know, they know the nooks and crannies. Well, an incident provides an opportunity to get those experts to say all of that knowledge, to get that out in front of people who don't know that, absent the event, would never know it, because that stuff's not written down in the wiki. It's not written down in an email. It's not in a design document, right? And especially when you have long-lived teams, right? Why would I write it down when I've been on this team of, you know, 5 people, and we've been here for 5 years, and we've rewritten or migrated this, you know, twice already, so everybody knows it. Why would I write that stuff down? By the way, I have other things to do. So when you get that situation, that reminds me of, obviously not that much more, because Joe's thesis goes into quite a lot of detail on how people learn. But the staff ride makes that much more real, much more, I mean, yeah, I think I cannot be in more violent agreement with you right now. This is a great idea. We should follow up on this.
Oh, that would, I think, be great. And, you know, one of the things that struck me, you know, for those listening that might not be familiar with staff rides, it started in the military in Germany and then adopted by the US like 100 years ago. And the idea was you take a team to the place where a former battle occurred, and you literally walk the ground and you try and immerse yourself in the dilemmas and the challenges, the conflicts and trade-offs everyone was dealing with. So then, of course, that's what they've done in the wildland firefighter community. But then one of the things that really struck me in Joe's thesis was there's the second order effect, or at least opportunity, above and beyond the powerful learning that that can produce, if you send a team and it's like, our team is going to do this staff ride, then in the course of learning individually about what happened, it builds this kind of learning organization capability or enhances that within the members of that team. So if you get, you potentially can get not only learning that you wouldn't get in any other way, but a team that builds up its ability to learn in the future with each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if I think about that, you know, and first for all of our listeners, we'll put a link in the show notes off to the paper that's titled "Do Staff Rides Help Move the Forest Service Towards Its Goal of Becoming a Learning Organization?" But my question then, to sort of follow up on that, when I think about some of the things that we at least encourage folks to do within the DevOps community, or things like game days, things like opening up your postmortem to more than just the people that responded to that incident. Can these practices help us get to something that simulates or is very close to that staff ride idea?
You know, and as I'm listening to you, Nathan, one of the things that I was also wondering about, and I was curious on your experience with this, John, the notion of a pre-mortem to, you know, could that be valuable? In a pre-mortem, you kind of mock up what a disaster or crisis would be when it hasn't happened and the pressure's off, and people can you know, maybe come up with some ideas that they never would. So, you know, maybe a pre-mortem is another thing that might work into a field guide. One of the things I've been telling people is kind of my recommendation to sort of a gentle introduction into the STELLA report, John, is to watch your velocity talk from October of 2017 first, then read the report, and then watch Richard Cook's DevOps Days Detroit talk. And if you kind of do those three pieces, it at least kind of gets you in. Then particularly, I think your velocity talk sets for operational folks like myself a good context before reading the report, you know, cover to cover. But from those three things, which I've been kind of pushing my colleagues to, hey, please do this. In Richard Cook's DevOps Days Detroit keynote, you know, he pointed out that organization gets truncated, or excuse me, rather, learning gets truncated at organizational boundaries.
Right.
And so that's like another dimension. It's these problems are hard when they're within a team. And I think one of the things that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet is that kind of above the line, below the line concept. Maybe difficult to discuss without graphics, because you talked earlier about kind of the STELLA report, you wanted to paint the landscape. And looking at the graphic for that above the line, below the line, you know, it makes me look at the landscape of our incidents in a completely different way than I used to. So
that's great to hear, by the way, because that was the intention. It's
incredibly effective. I'm going to put it up in one of our corridors, blown up on a big poster size print, and kind of push people to look at it. But as you know, as I think about that aspect of it too, that it's like you know, this problem that Richard brought up about learning gets truncated at organizational boundaries, then it made me think about not only kind of the system, like our team's system, but more socio-technical systems. And in your velocity talk, you talked about, you know, how does our system work really? How does it break really? Yeah. And when we were discussing this in our little World Cafe session, I mentioned, well, you could expand that to say, how does our team work really? How does our team break really? And then because we have these organizational boundaries where learning gets truncated, there are these teams around us. They might be our cloud service providers. They might be upstream or downstream of our IT organization. You know, how does their team break really and work really? And how do we get to the point where, as we're all trying to cope with this complexity that keeps growing on us, that we not only get better at learning about our stuff, but we get better at the socio-technical stuff, particularly across organizations?
Yeah. Well, between you and Nathan, you guys both brought up like a handful of topics there. You know, I think if I were to bring a couple of the things that you said sort of together, you know, that was one of the observations. That was a clear observation that learning is truncated at organizational boundaries. And by the way, anybody who's listening, if you want to quickly, you know, jump the gun and make some sort of connection to Conway's Law, then I'm sure you can. I would suggest you don't, to just sit with the description of as it is. But yeah, Nathan, what you pointed out, and I would say is this is something I do have some experience in. You know, having debriefings that are open to anybody who wants to come. What I found when I was CTO at Etsy, I found, so there's a couple of things. There are many mistakes I made at Etsy. I will tell you that this particular topic is not one of them. I feel pretty, and I'm not a boastful man, but I feel pretty happy with the way sort of things way things turned out. Every summer we'd have interns. When I found out that word gets around, interns, and even the previous interns who are there for either winter break or they've come on permanent or, you know, full-time, is whatever you do, try to go to postmortems, especially the ones you're not involved in. This is, I didn't say this. This is what interns told each other. Why? Because you can, because that's where real shit happens. That's where you find out real stuff. And then the thing that I like to find out, twice in my last year of CTOing, I found that I had a meeting with somebody, an engineer, and they had canceled on me, said they had some sort of home thing they got to deal with. They didn't have a home thing they had to deal with. They just canceled the meeting with me because they wanted to go to a postmortem. And so I know what it looks like when postmortems are standing room only. I know what it looks like to have people sitting on the floor because the room's not big enough. And I will say that that is the trade-off, right? Now you have a lot of salary in that room. And so, but the good news, and what this we used to say in the debrief, we had a debriefing. I think they still do actually a debriefing facilitation class, a course that we taught. And you know what we would always say is 50% of your job as a facilitator is to get everybody in that room to come to the next postmortem. And so that helps with that truncation issue. And so, but I think as you point out, Alan, is that there's always going to be a trade-off there. One thing that I was just going to answer real quick on the topic of game days. So the game days that's the thing. Game days, are they useful in teasing out dark debt? I don't think so. And why is that? It's because dark debt are revealed by incidents that you haven't imagined. And game days necessarily are contrived, right? So the elements of uncertainty, of origin, of contributors, and all of that, the sources of issues, that sort of thing. If that's missing, then it's not really dark debt. It doesn't mean it doesn't have huge amounts of value and exploratory value. I think those things do. But yeah. There was a couple of topics that you all hit upon. Oh, sorry. One other thing. Yes, pre-mortems. Gary Klein's prospective hindsight is another way of saying pre-mortem. And I will say that I do think that there's a huge amount of value in this, and it's likely that you would probably anybody would probably piggyback on a pre-existing process that you've got, or whatever dialogue that you have, whatever part of your, whatever part of your either your planning or your work where somebody says, all right, well, you know what, let's write down all of the things, or let's come up with the things, what could possibly go wrong, right? At Etsy, we used to call these operability reviews, and that sort of evolved over the years. But quick trick to try in your own organization. If you start with that question, you have a team of folks that are familiar. They might have built the thing. Okay, all right, you know what? We're not totally sure. We don't feel great about this just yet. We don't feel perfect, but we want to do some diligence. And so let's just go over this go or no go, whatever. And so what could possibly go wrong? Asking the question that way might get you a list of things. Generally speaking, it's not going to be super comprehensive, because generally the people who build things like to think that they thought of it all, at least while they were building it. They certainly have thought of many things. And you'll get a list of things. Oh, well, I'm nervous about this. What keeps us up at night about this? Oh, I'm nervous about this. I think with this, what would we do if that happened? Blah, 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 blah. You get some list. And then if you follow that up with, okay, completely different situation. Wipe your mind blank. Now, it's an hour after. It's an hour after we put this into production, or we've turned up the feature flags or whatever, and it all goes horribly wrong. What are reasons that? What are things that we could think of that would bring it to go horribly wrong? And use those exact words, because it's completely vague. You don't even pretend to say, oh, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. And then what you do is you'll get a list of those things, and compare that to the list of things you got when you asked what could possibly go wrong. And I will tell you, in my years of doing this, I wish I knew this earlier on in my career. I always get things that are different. And if you read Klein would say that the reason for that is from a cognitive standpoint, what you're doing is you're starting from the place where you're looking for an explanation. Looking for an explanation and predicting something is different. They're different. You use different parts of your mind. This is why hindsight is 20/20. And so you're really kind of, like to think you can't really do this, but it's a useful exercise. So, similar dynamic to question storming, if you've ever heard of that, versus brainstorming. Question storming is the process where you try to come up with the best question you could ask about a given phenomena, and you even in a group, you gather all of them, and then you kind of maybe vote or sort of game, say like, scoreboard, like what's the best question? Because then you don't have to have any answers. And answers are what are the things that stop people from suggesting things in brainstorming. They're like, oh, what about, oh no, that's not gonna, oh, what about, oh no, no, that's actually not that big of a deal. So they never even say those things out loud. Whereas when you really challenge somebody, like, come on, give me your best question. And I mean a question that stumps everybody. You're like, oh yeah, I can do that. Check this out. Here's the best question. And everybody's like, oh, that was awesome. So now all of a sudden, everybody's got a direction to go in. I think you're right. I think there's something in there. I would like for there to be a field guide. It would have to be multiple volumes, and to not get too detailed. Certainly, if you'd like to learn more about how this work is done, you can read my thesis. Either or if you have a difficulty sleeping, you can read it. the technical term for a family of approaches is called process tracing. You might want to call it cognitive process tracing to help any Google searches, because otherwise you might just end up with Brendan Gregg blog posts. Cognitive task analysis is really the family of methods that we're talking about. This is the bread and butter of resilience engineering. It's the bread and butter of cognitive systems engineering. It is the stuff behind the scenes. It is the stuff that you don't see in the STELLA report. That's not the topic, but it produced the STELLA report. And doing cognitive task analysis is exactly the routes, the methods that we use. And my hope is that, in the same way, I've said it a lot recently, in the same way that I think we've been in the industry long enough to remember when, remember when distributed systems language wasn't a part of our vocabulary, right? Eventual consistency, vector clocks, and any other sort of, Leslie Lamport, originating concepts, the CAP theorem and all that good bit. My hope is that what we're talking about will become part of the lexicon, and it will become part of software. And I'd love, we have an opportunity to do it in ways that aviation will be very jealous. Medicine will be very jealous. So that's my last little plug.
That's awesome. So, unfortunately, we're close on time. I did have one final question that, I think it goes along with what you were just saying. But my final question is really, what sort of support do you need to continue this research? How can we in the field help further push this along? How do we share our experiences back to you and into the report and things like that?
All of what you're doing, the fact that, it is hugely, share the paper, talk about the paper, right? Think about how the concept of technical debt spread after Ward wrote it, right? And so talking about it, the only reason why I even know Richard Cook is because of his paper called How Complex Systems Fail. I don't know anybody who doesn't think that that's an excellent paper. And so my strong suggestion, outside of if you want to join the consortium, you could certainly email us. For those who aren't into that sort of thing and would rather that type of work be happening in your teams privately, well, you can check out my consulting group and help me stay out of a full-time job. That would be really great. Which is at adaptivecapacitylabs.com. I think the overarching, suggestion is to engage with these topics. Become curious. Again, I'll come back to those two questions. What makes this work hard? What makes people good at it? And largely, this is qualitative data, qualitative analysis, qualitative research. There are quantitative parts to it, but I would argue that qualitative research and analysis is very, very foreign to our field. It almost always sits somewhere in the realm of UX or design, if you're lucky. And even then, it feels like, oh, I don't know, it's magic. It doesn't have a number on it, so it can't be real. Or it must be anecdotal, which means you must immediately toss it. Well, consider a possibility that you don't, and there's some critical work, critical insight to be gained from doing that. So share the papers, talk about the concepts. Richard, Dave, myself, we're all on Twitter. We'll certainly reach out and talk.
All right, great. So we should reach out to you at your consulting agency. That's adaptivecapacitylabs.com. We should reach out to the consortium. What's the URL for that? How do we reach the consortium?
Snafuketchers.com.
All right, snafuketchers.com. And we've talked about the STELLA report, but I don't think we've mentioned, how do I download the STELLA report? Where can I find it?
You go to stella.report.
It's pretty easy, right?
It's super easy.
That's awesome. And we will include Twitter handles for, of course, John, for Richard, for everyone in the consortium in the show notes, so that you can easily get in touch with them, as well as all of the URLs that we've talked about. So,
yeah.
Wow, this has been a great conversation. I think that there's so much to learn from this, and I think you know, encouraging everyone out there who's listening to go and think about, how does this apply to yourself, and how do you bring this practice into your own organization would be great. So now's the point where we move on to the picks. The picks is the part of this show where we just go around and ask our panelists to share anything, something that they've found interesting. It can be related to this topic or not, technical or not. Alan, maybe we'll start with you for a pick or two.
Sure, a couple things. So we can get the link into the show notes, but the Wildland Firefighters Community, their lessons learned organization, anyone interested in pursuing postmortems, learning reviews, there's a wealth of resources there. It's a treasure trove. Similarly, the European counterpart to our Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, is called Eurocontrol, and they have a collection of resources at a place called Skybrary. Great stuff there. And then on a completely non-technical note, just because it's, to me, like this fascinatingly intense combination of collaboration and communication that I wouldn't have expected. Curling. If you want to see a sport that puts the ultimate premium on collaboration and communication, check out curling. Every member, 4 members on a team, every member has to be in constant communication to make even a single shot. It's as sport goes, it's interesting stuff.
Awesome, thanks, Alan. How about you, John?
You know, I'm gonna. Boy, you're asking me. Oh, hey, do you have a paper that you think people would be interested in? I'm only going to give one. So I'll put all my eggs in this particular basket. There's a paper called Problem Detection, and I'll give a link to it. And it's Woods, Pliss, Crandall, Gary Klein, and the paper is 2005, and it's really about problem detection. A number of folks and myself sort of haphazardly did a sort of pseudo book club on the paper. The idea alone that problem detection and problem identification from a cognitive standpoint could be seen as different and separate. That's just mind blower number 1 of a couple of hundred in this paper, and it sets the stage. By the way, if you, I could show you the link. Well, I'll certainly put the link so that we can get it in the show notes. But you'll also note that it's cited in the STELLA report, and the link is also in the STELLA report. And so I know that once you've downloaded the STELLA report, or pick up the one that you've already downloaded and marked up, and because you've got all kinds of notes in the margins and all that sort of thing, you can find it there. That's my suggestion.
All right, awesome. Well, so for my pick, I'll tell you the thing that surprised me the most this week. So I had the opportunity this week to take my son out to Seattle for a college visit. And as many times as I've been to Seattle, I will say this is the first time I felt like I was a tourist in Seattle. And I got to see things that weren't just the nightlife, that weren't just the chef offices. Seattle is an amazing city, and it was super fun to go and explore the city. So what I would recommend as my pick is, if you do a lot of business travel, do yourself a favor and try to set aside some time for you to explore the city that you're traveling to during daylight hours. I know that there are, every city I go to, I know has really interesting things. And I was really blown away by how awesome the city of Seattle was. And I know that I could say the same about other cities if I spent more time there not working. So that's my pick for today. Alan, John, thank you. It's been awesome having you on the show today. This has been a really, really great discussion. I'm sure that there's tons of follow-up questions, and maybe we'll just have to have another follow-up episode in a couple of months. So thanks again for tuning in to the Food Fight Show today, and until next time, listeners, keep it hot.